what I'm gonna do tonight, it's an attempt to connect the textual evidence, the medical evidence, to breastfeeding from my point of view. So let's see it. First of all, I would like to thank University of Birmingham and all the departments involved for such an amazing opportunity to broadcast my research and learn from you as well. So my presentation today, as Canon introduced, is part of my ongoing research. Nowadays, I find myself finishing my PhD at São Paulo State University, Unesp, here in Brazil. And I have been conducting this research for a while now under Professor Margarida Maria de Carvalho's supervision. As I have just said, in my research, I don't focus on breastfeeding per se. Instead, I'm concerned with the Hippocratic point of view towards female physiology, how the doctors perceived it, and most importantly, to what extent was female physiology inscribed in a broader understanding of human nature. In order to do so, I need to dive into medical's physiological and humoral approach to the body, together with their generation theory. I must also turn to a significant range of Hippocratic treatises, since one text can shed light on another. As Helen King asserts, this strategy can be a risky one, once we might assume a continuum that is not always there. However, we should bear in mind that the Hippocratic corpus is cohesive. And according to Pedro Laín Entralgo, César Sierra Martin, Robin Lane Fox, to name a few, this cohesion is based on three major elements, right? So the elements are: the medical knowledge of all writings is supported by the concept of physiology and by the techneia triché, the technical medicine groundings. Besides it, all authors are Greek, most of them Ionians. So let's take a look at the treatises. Let me see if I can. Here. Of the nearly 60 treatises which compose the so-called Corpus Hippocraticum, developed in the 50 and 40 centuries BC, 4th centuries BC, 10 focus on female issues, which means that a quarter of the collection involves women's affairs. The texts are the ones that you can see here on the screen. These treatises offer us a detailed account of women's bodies, nature, and lives. Alongside medical theories and treatments, I identify, it's what I'm trying to show tonight, that female nature is interwoven with human's nature. This would seem rather obvious, were it not for Pandora's myth's impact on Greek societies. I shall return to that shortly. So I'm going to reflect on testimony from, not from all of these texts, of course, but from on generation, on the nature of the child, on nature of women, on diseases of women 1, closely followed by on nature of men and on regimen. So let's begin with what was also the starting point of every Hippocratic treatment, the feces. We know that technique guided doctors' accurate intervention in the human body. And such an intervention was based not only on technique, but above all on the understanding of human nature. For the effectiveness of the treatment, the doctor, the physician, needed to deeply comprehend the feces as a whole, whilst being able to grasp the features of each individual, each patient, male or female, under his care. This idea is found in one of the gynecological texts I have just shown, Nature of Women, which reads, "This is my account of the nature and diseases of women. The most important factor is in human affairs is the divine, then the natures, feces of women and their complexions. A person, in the case, a doctor, who manages these matters correctly must begin from divine factors and then distinguish the natures of women, tastet physias ton gynaikon, their ages, the seasons, and the places where they happen to be. Examining this passage suggests to us that the number one principle of Techinea Triché was taken into account by physicians when dealing with female patients. Doctors are advised to consider women's ages and particular feces, thus contemplating the features within each woman without forgetting the wholeness. The ancient author links microcosm and macrocosm. Women's nature had to be considered under their individual constitutions and simultaneously under nature's external power. So let's take a look here. It is not far-fetched to assume that the Hippocratic physiological theory was applied to women's bodies during medical procedures. Still, this passage from Nature of Women raises the question of whether women share the same feces, not exactly the same feces, but the same substance as men do. Also, if the Greeks deemed women as part of humankind. Hence, I argue women were not seen in Hippocratic medicine as unrelated to humankind. They were humankind itself as much as men. Once feces is the principle and substance of all living things, women are inscribed in the cosmic and human ordainment. She or they originate from a universal feces, which is subdivided into relational fields, children and elderly, woman and man, and she contributes to the formation and existence of humans during reproduction. So here comes the generational theory part. So I identify a double belonging of women to humankind, in the ramification of the holistic nature into two complementary sexes, female and male, one in relation to the other, and in her direct contribution to the perpetuation of the species, which she integrates. The role of female and male seeds, that is, of what we currently understand by egg and sperm, as well as their articulations in the formation of the human body, are discussed in detail by the authors of the treatises on generation and on the nature of the child. The author's view is based on the theory of pangenesis, which asserts that the seeds would come from the whole body. That's why we talk about a wholeness here. Therefore, both in the first and the second treatises, as we shall see, the participation of the female seed follows the theory of pangenesis in the generative process, as we can attest. So let's take a look. I'm not going to read all of them for the sake of the time, but when we take a look, we can see that a man's seed comes from all the moisture in his body. The author attests this, and then he repeats his idea. And women too ejaculate from their body. Sometimes what is ejaculated by a woman is stronger. Furthermore, in a man, there are both female semen and male semen, and the same in a woman. In her analysis of the fluids involved in the generation of children, Rebecca Fleming is concerned with assessing the very nature of seminal fluids. By reassessing some works of Hippocrates, the historian aims to apprehend whether female and male seeds were made of the same substance. Because we cannot only say, okay, they have the same feces, but what about their seminal fluids? I agree with her when she attests that there isn't any substantial distinction between the between the seeds, at least not how they are put here, how they are described here by the Hippocratics. By declaring that women and men carry each other's seeds within, what underlies the author's statement is the common trait of the collection. As we have asserted, for the Hippocratics, the feces is the foundation of everything. that lives, everything that exists. And as such, it composes human nature, male and female. When a woman and a man have intercourse, their fluids are able to engender a new being. The substance that forms them is identical, although each body will manifest expressive physiological differences, and these, as we know, are gender-oriented in the textual evidence. Likewise, the existence of the feminine and masculine particles in both woman and man means that the human being comes from the union of these two semens, and not only from the male share. The awareness of the female seed is not accidental in the Hippocratic corpus. The physicians constantly emphasize it, since it is a fundamental aspect of their generation theory, as we can verify on the following texts. And again, I'm not going to read everything, but just so you can see, we identify them on generation, on nature of the child, on diseases of women, one, and on regimen. From these passages, what immediately comes out is the repetition that the female seed plays a great deal in reproduction. I do not believe women didn't take part in the generation process, because this is not what our medical data tells us. Alternatively, doctors recognized women's share when engendering a new being. So we can infer two things: both the male acknowledgement of women's generational contribution and their belonging to humankind. How could women be seen apart from humanity if, in the first place, humanity would not even be possible without them? They didn't have an active role only when fulfilling the social duty of bearing a child. They were not seen as mere vessels supposed to receive male seed. This established, one might ask, where does breastfeeding come in? What does nursing have to do with feces, generation, and humoral theory, and humankind, and also humankind? In the fourth chapter of On Nature of Man, we are introduced to the humoral theory, which states that, as we shall see, a person's body has in itself blood, phlegm, yellow and black bile. This is the nature of the body through which it becomes sick and becomes healthy. Supported, among other evidence, by the use of the term anthropos to designate the human species, we believe that the author is equally referring to the somatic composition and nature of men and women. In other words, when determining the internal fluids that build up the body of human beings, the iathros is not concerned with establishing a clear distinction, at least not here, not on the street, is it? A clear distinction between female and male matter. Men and women carried within themselves the natural humors, which resulted in health or illness, depending on interactions with external nature, climate changes, and their own harmonic or disruptive interplay. According to the holistic groundings of Hippocratic treatises, human reproduction would be directly linked to humidity and or circulating humors in the body, because such fluids make up the matter of women and men. They also form the seeds responsible for engendering a new life. Let us recall the author's words in the first section of On Generation. So let us go back a little bit. Here he states that, let's see, a man's seed comes from all his body, all his moisture. Most importantly, we argue that breastfeeding also played a great deal in making these fluids, these humors, these generation material available for newborns. Such evidence can again be found in the nature of man. which reads, let's take a look here. So the author says, so long as a man, and here man, a person, lives, he or she manifestly has all these elements, the elements mentioned above, the fluids, the humors, always in him or in her. Then he, she is born out of a human being, having all these elements, and is nursed in a human being having them all. Not only his account reinforces the connection between female nature and the physiological and humoral theory, once a person is born out of a human being, having all these elements, but it also manifests the power and capacities of women when breastfeeding. From all the above, I argue that mother's milk provided much more than nourishment. Once doctors believed breast milk carried the four humors, or it doesn't need to be specifically the humors, but these generative fluids of life. This could mean that women were capable of passing on these fundamental elements of the physical body to their children, adding up their importance. As Toteling affirms, and here I quote her, milk, the seemingly simple substance, provides a very good point of entry into the study of societies, their values and modes of life. Breast milk, specifically, was one through which a mother could pass on many features, good or bad, to her nurslings. Thus, as I have attempted to demonstrate, breastfeeding was yet another piece of evidence of how interwoven these concepts were and how female physiology can be seen and studied within a broader framework. That's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. Needless to say that I'm open to the suggestions and discussion, further discussion.